So, you're having an argument, and you started out like this.
But is that logical?
Logic is the beginning of wisdom.
But be honest, how often does it end up like this?
How dare you compare my mothering to my mother?
You are! And you're like my father. You're also like my mother. You're all the bad things about all of these people.
It's exhausting. And Dale Carnegie famously said, you can't win an argument because if you lose, you lose. And if you win, you lose anyway. Now, as a philosopher, this deeply offends me. Taking advice from a self-help guru, and a dead one at that, arguments are our whole reason for being. Yet even I have to admit, he's kind of right. Even with the best evidence, great examples, flawless logic, even a beautiful slide deck, people will just ignore you. Or worse, walk away even more convinced they were right in the first place. And I'll be the first to admit that even when I summon the patience of the Buddha himself, which we'll get into, he has thoughts on this too, I can start out arguing with somebody to reach the truth and end up arguing because I want to win. So what's going on here? Well, we've talked a lot about ideology on the channel lately, how people can see the same facts, they live style, but reach completely different conclusions. That ideology is just the water we swim in. But there's a level underneath that, because it turns out that there are three completely different things that we call arguing. One that helps us find the truth, one that helps us persuade, and one that poisons everything it touches. Now, we've known about these three very different types of arguing since the ancient Greeks, but in a very human way, each age seems to forget them again and to get them confused, and thus we need a little bit of a reminder. The ancient Greeks called them dialectic, rhetoric, and heuristic. Dialectic is arguing to find out what's true together. Rhetoric is arguing to move someone, to persuade them. And heuristic, that's arguing to win, to dominate, to make the other person lose. The problem is we have basically one word for all three, which means we keep stumbling into one game, thinking we're playing another game. Plus, when we ask why arguments fail, why being right almost never changes anyone's mind, psychology, philosophy, and politics all kind of converge on the same discomforting answer, which we'll get to. Okay, so to tackle all that, there's a few things. First, I want to show you the three games and how to tell which one you're actually in, because it's usually not the one you think. And secondly, we'll look at why being right doesn't work through the lens of all three of those disciplines. And then third, we'll come to terms with what actually does change minds, and it's possibly not what you'd expect. And finally, I'll ask a question that philosophers have been worrying about since Socrates himself. If logic doesn't change minds, should we learn to persuade people instead? Or is that just manipulation in the name of truth? And then we can confront a genuine disagreement. What should we actually do? So let's start with the game most of us think we're playing. All right, three games, three different versions of arguing. And let me show you what each one actually looks like, because the moment you can tell them apart, everything about the disastrous way we experience arguments these days seems to make a little more sense. Firstly, there's dialectic, the truth game. This is what most of us think we're doing when we're arguing. Two people reasoning together, trying to figure out what's actually true. You present your evidence, I present mine, we follow the logic wherever it leads, and whoever has the better case wins? No. Whoever has the better case helps us all get closer to the truth. And maybe we actually arrive at a third place, which none of us held or expected when we started out arguing, but makes sense at the end of our journey. In dialectic, there's no winner and loser. There's just the truth, which we're both trying to find. And the poster child for this is again Socrates, who wandered around Athens asking people annoying questions until they realized they didn't quite know what they thought they knew. Now, he wasn't trying to win an argument, not at all. He was trying to help people examine their assumptions, their hidden logics and their beliefs. Crucially, he claimed to benefit from it just as much when he was proven wrong, because he'd learned something and gotten the chance to correct a mistaken belief himself. If you want to see dialectic in action, watch a film like 12 Angry Men.
Then what do you want?
I just want to talk.
Well, what's there to talk about? 11 men in here think he's guilty. No one had to think about it twice except you.
I want to ask you something. Do you believe his story?
I don't know whether I believe it or not. Maybe I don't.
So how come you vote not guilty?
Well, there were 11 votes for guilty. It's not easy to raise my hand and send a boy off to die without talking about it first.
Well, now, who says it's easy?
No one.
What, just because I voted fast? I honestly think the guy's guilty. Couldn't change my mind if you talked for 100 years.
I'm not trying to change your mind. It's just that we're talking about somebody's life here. We can't decide it in 5 minutes, supposing we're wrong.
Supposing we're wrong. Supposing this whole building should fall down on my head. You can suppose anything.
That's right.
Look, what's the difference how long it takes? Suppose we do it in 5 minutes, so what?
Let's take an hour. Ball game doesn't start till 8 o'clock.
Who's got something to say?
I'm willing to sit for an hour.
Henry Fonda's Juror 8 doesn't storm in trying to prove everybody wrong. He just asks questions. He introduces doubt. He says things like, I don't know if this kid is guilty or innocent, I just think we should talk about it. And slowly, over 2 hours, he changes the temperature of that room without actually defeating anybody. He just makes space for everybody to think. And that's dialectic. It's really beautiful. It's rare. It's what philosophy is all about. And it requires something that most arguments don't have, which is a willingness in both parties to be genuinely willing to change their minds. Which brings us to the second type of argument, rhetoric. The persuasion game. Now, rhetoric isn't evil. Aristotle literally wrote the book on it, and he argued that rhetoric is what you do when you're talking to actual humans rather than purely rational beings, because people aren't logic machines. We have values, we have emotions, identities, and histories, and if you want to move somebody to actually persuade them, you can't just hand them a valid syllogism and expect them to update their beliefs. It takes just a little more than that, no matter how Spock-like we might aspire to be. So rhetoric is logos, logic, yes, the logical argument, but it's also ethos, your credibility, your character, the why should they trust you part of the equation. And then Aristotle argued it's also pathos, the emotional resonance, the sense that this matters, that it accords with your experience of things or how things ought to be. Its peak, Mr. Smith, goes to Washington.
They're listening to him. Anything might happen now.
Just get up off the ground. That's all I ask. Get up there with that lady that's up on top of this Capitol dome, that lady that stands for liberty. Take a look at this country through her eyes if you really want to see something. And you won't just see scenery. You'll see the whole parade of what man's carved out for himself after centuries of fighting. And fighting for something better than just jungle law. Fighting so as he can stand on his own 2 feet, free and decent, like he was created. No matter what his race, color, or creed. That's what you see. There's no place out there for graft, or greed, or lies, or compromise with human liberties. And if that's what the grown-ups have done with this world that was given to them, then we better get those boys' camps started fast and see what the kids can do. And it's not too late, because this country is bigger than the Taylors, or you, or me, or anything else.
And that's because Jimmy Stewart's Jefferson Smith isn't just presenting evidence of corruption. Instead, he's appealing to what America is supposed to be. He's using everything, his exhaustion, his idealism, and his refusal to quit to make the Senate feel something. That's rhetoric in service of truth. And the kicker is, well, spoiler alert for an 87-year-old film, but it doesn't work. Not directly, at least. The corrupt senators don't suddenly see the light. Smith collapses. What breaks is Senator Payne's conscience, his guilt, shame, something that logic alone couldn't reach, which tells us something important as well. Even perfect rhetoric often needs something else to land, be that connection or relationship or experiencing it for yourself, a crack in the armor that logic or rhetoric couldn't necessarily make. And sometimes the people you're talking to aren't playing the persuasion game at all. Sometimes they're playing the third game, heuristic, like this guy.
I believe that we need freedom and choice when it comes to our ice cream, and that, Joy Naylor, that is the definition of liberty.
But that's not what we're talking about.
Ah, but that's what I'm talking about.
But you didn't prove that vanilla's the best.
I didn't have to. I proved that you're wrong, and if you're wrong, I'm right.
But you still didn't convince me.
It's that I'm not after you. I'm after them.
The heuristic is arguing to win, not to find the truth or to genuinely persuade, just to dominate, to make the other person lose, to come out on top regardless of how the other person feels about it. The goal here isn't to change anyone's mind, including your own. The goal is victory. And if you've ever been in an argument where it stopped being about the topic and started being about who was going to back down first, well then you've been in an heuristic argument. The ancient Greeks warned us about this one. They watched it corrode their politics and their friendships and basically their ability to function as a society. It's where we get the idea of demagogues from and the threat of democracy collapsing into autocracy. And 2,000 years later, perhaps we're speedrunning the same mistakes, except now we have the internet too. So how do you know which game you're in? Well, try this. In dialectic, both people can answer the question, what would change your mind? Whereas in rhetoric, you're asking, what does this person value? How do I help them see what I see? And in the heuristic, there's an audience, even if it's just the audience in your own head, where backing down would feel like humiliation, like being wrong. Now, it wouldn't be me if I didn't highlight the difficult part. So let's be honest with ourselves. Most of us think we're in the first game, right? And we're maybe, for a bunch of unintended reasons, often in the third, the heuristic. Which brings me straight back to the question, why? Why does this keep happening? Why does being right almost never actually work? And when we ask this question, there are three completely different disciplines that give us kind of the same depressing answer. So let's start first with psychology, because we like to think that we process arguments like judges, weighing the evidence, following the logic, updating our beliefs when the facts demand it. That's not really how brains work. Instead, we process arguments like, may God have mercy on our souls, like lawyers, for our own side. Psychologists call this motivated reasoning. When someone presents evidence against what we already believe, we don't evaluate it neutrally necessarily. We defend a bit, we scrutinize it for flaws, and we look for reasons to dismiss it. But when somebody presents evidence that supports what we believe, well, we often accept it uncritically, saying, yep, that sounds right. I always thought so. Now, not always, maybe not even most of the time, but we are being presented with evidence and making judgments all the time, all day, every day, dozens of times a day. And even the best amongst us slowly let that bias leak in, which is okay if we know about it and if we have the energy to guard against it. But we're human. Often we don't. And motivated reasoning gets worse when the belief is tied to our identity. If we believe something because it's part of who we are, part of my politics or my values or my sense of what kind of person I am, then the attack on that belief makes me feel like an attack on me. And when we feel attacked, we don't update, we double down, we entrench. There's even research suggesting that in some cases, presenting somebody with facts that contradicts their beliefs can actually make them believe the opposite more strongly, so that the very act of trying to correct them backfires. Now, this doesn't always happen. It depends on how identity threatening the topic is, but it can happen, which means that sometimes the harder you try to win, the more you guarantee you'll lose. And then there's our egos, what some might call the face. Public arguments are brutal because conceding a point in them feels like losing status. If there's an audience, even just one other person, then backing down costs us something. So we dig in. We cling to positions that we might have abandoned in private, because now our reputation is on the line. As the philosopher Isaac Wiegman puts it, the only people who can be convinced by reasons are those who don't have a dog in the fight to begin with. Philosophies notice this too, because remember the argument as war kind of metaphor? When we talk about arguments like battles, or we attack positions, we defend our views, we shoot down objections, we win or we lose. But here's what Daniel Cohen, a philosopher who studies this, points out. If argument is war, then learning really feels like losing. If you change your mind, you've been defeated, you've surrendered. The metaphor itself makes us frankly stupid. It punishes the one thing that should be celebrated, actually updating your beliefs when you encounter better evidence. And then he argues something that I initially found weird and then quite revelatory, because Cohen suggests that in an argument, the person who loses is often the only one who's actually gained anything. They've learned something. The winner just walked away with their existing beliefs intact and a little bit less of their life to spare. And then there's politics, where all of this plays out on a much bigger and more consequential scale. You might think, for example, that political debates change minds, with two candidates presenting their cases, then the public weighing the evidence and totting up the score. But political science research on this is pretty clear. Debates mostly don't persuade anyone. People watch debates like fans watching their team play. They cheer for their side and they think that their candidate won, and then they walk away with the same views basically that they walked in with. So just to detour for a second, but what does the political science research actually show working in politics? Well, not arguments, but actually stories and emotional resonance. Basically, identity appeals. This is why every campaign speech you've ever heard sounds the same. Sort of like this. I was in a small town called Springfield last week and I met a man named Homer, a patriot, a father of three, who just wants to provide for his family. You've heard this speech 1,000 times before, and it's not an argument. It's just an invitation to feel something before you've had time to think. Or think about the most effective political slogans. They don't present a logical case that you could rebut. They tell a story that you can project yourself into, and they make you feel something. Take Back Control, for example, didn't win the Brexit referendum by laying out economic arguments. It invited people to feel empowered and to feel like they were reclaiming something. And as the psychologists would agree, you can't counter-argue a feeling. And this isn't unique to any one side of politics. The most effective political communication, left or right or anywhere, works basically the same way. It moves people by making them feel, not by making them think. So here's where we are. Psychological research indicates that being right doesn't matter if the other person feels threatened, while philosophers get at something different. They say the way we think about arguing makes us worse at learning, and politics tells us logic loses to emotion every single time, which means that if you want to actually change someone's mind, winning the argument is almost exactly the wrong approach. So what does work? The answer, of course, is re-education camps. Put everybody into re-education camps and play my YouTube videos on a loop till everyone agrees with me, and then I would have no one to argue with. Oh no. But that's impractical, for now at least. So if being right doesn't work, what does? Well, time for a humbling truth. Minds don't usually change in the moment. They change later. Quietly and privately when nobody's watching, sometimes weeks or months after the conversation. And whenever that happens, it depends almost entirely on how the conversation felt. If it felt like an attack, then the walls went up and nothing's getting through that. But if it felt like a genuine attempt to understand, even if there was disagreement, something might shift. Not immediately, but the seed is there. So what actually creates the condition for someone to change their mind? Well, first thing, they have to feel heard, not agreed with, heard. There's a difference. And yes, I heard you about this, Phil. If someone feels like you've actually understood their position, then they're far more likely to consider yours. If they feel like you're just waiting for them to stop talking so you can deliver your rebuttal, then they'll dig in. Then secondly, questions work better than assertions. This is the Socratic insight, but it applies to everyday life too. When you tell someone they're wrong, they defend. But when you ask them how they arrived at their view, they think. Help me understand why you see it that way opens doors that, you missed the point, slams shut. And third, you have to make it safe to change. This is the face problem that we talked about earlier. If changing their minds means admitting they were stupid or losing status or betraying their tribe, they won't do it. The cost is too high. But if you made it clear that updating a view is a sign of intelligence, not weakness, then you've changed that calculation. But fourthly, and this one is awkward, but it helps if they like you, or at least if they respect you. Persuasion research is pretty consistent on this. We're more open to ideas from people we feel connected to. The same argument that bounces off when it comes from a stranger might land when it comes from a friend. Relationship is the container that makes everything else possible. And never underestimate humour too. There's a reason the court jester could say things to the king that would get anybody else executed. Comedy is always kind of a Trojan horse. It smuggles in ideas past defences that would block them if they arrived as arguments. When someone's laughing, they're not defending, they're open. This is why shows like The Office or Veep or even Thank You for Smoking can make points about power and ideology and human nature that a lecture like this never could. The laugh comes first, then the thought follows. And by the time you've thought it, it's too late to build a wall against it. The political research confirms all of this, by the way. The interventions that actually shift attitudes on contentious or identity-laden issues look nothing like debates. They look like curious conversations, often during canvassing, where people feel respected. But we don't need to go into the political science or the politics to understand this principle, because I think you felt it yourself. We've all felt it. The arguments that have stayed with me weren't the ones that someone demolished my position in. They were the ones where someone said something that made me think, and then where they gave me space to work with it and think about it. So what I take from this, and not to get too self-helpy about it, but what I take is we're not trying to win the argument in the moment. We're trying to plant something that might grow later. And that means our job isn't to be right. It's to not poison the soil. Which raises a harder question. If this is what works, listening and connecting and making people feel safe, are we even doing philosophy anymore? Or are we just doing persuasion, manipulation with a gentle voice? This is where the philosophers start fighting. Because, as you might have guessed, there's a tension here. Plato and Socrates before him drew a sharp line between dialectic and rhetoric. Dialectic is the real thing, two people reasoning together towards truth. Whereas for them, rhetoric is something else. It's persuasion, it's telling people what they want to hear. It produces belief, Plato said, but not knowledge. And Plato was genuinely worried, because to him, a skilled speaker can convince people of almost anything, whether it's true or not. That's dangerous. That's a demagogue, because a good speaker can make the weaker argument appear the stronger. They can move crowds without those crowds ever understanding the truth of the matter. Socrates put it bluntly in Plato's dialogue, rhetoric is flattery. It doesn't improve people, it doesn't educate them, it just moves them. And moving people isn't the same as helping them see. So if you follow Plato, the answer is clear. Don't play the persuasion game. Seek truth, ask questions. And if people aren't willing to reason with you honestly, then walk away. You can't logic someone out of a position they didn't logic themselves into. So don't even try. Just pursue what's true and let the chips fall where they may. There's a reason that Plato is a fan of autocracy rather than more democratic forms of governance. But then there's Aristotle. And Aristotle says, well, that's pretty naive. Yes, in an ideal world, truth would win on its own merits, but we don't live in that world. We live in a world where people have emotions and identities and biases and loyalties, where good ideas fail because they were communicated badly, and where charlatans win because they know how to tell a story. Aristotle's point is that the truth needs an advocate. If you care about what's true and what's good, you can't just retreat into pure dialectic and hope everyone figures it out. You have to meet the people where they are. You have to understand what they value and what moves them and what they're afraid of. And then you have to use ethos and pathos, not just logos. Otherwise, the people who don't care about the truth, they will do the persuading, and they won't be as scrupulous as you. So who's right? Should we argue for truth alone and accept that most people won't listen? Or should we learn the arts of persuasion and risk becoming the thing that we're fighting against? This question also applies to me. Look, I should be honest, I've been doing all three of these things to you throughout these videos. The emotional clips, the jokes, the arguments, the carefully placed Buddha quote. That's rhetoric with a heavy splash of pathos. So I'm not just laying out the truth and letting you decide. I'm also trying to move you. I acknowledge that. I'm trying to make you see it my way. Is that manipulation? Maybe it is, but I prefer to think of it as a kind of translation. But I would say that, wouldn't I? So let's call this video dialectic in intention, but rhetoric in execution. And if you check the comments section in a bit, probably a little heuristic when somebody tells me I've misunderstood Aristotle. I contain multitudes, often annoyingly defensive ones. And here's where the Buddha comes in. I promised he would, because he offers kind of a third option. In the Dhammapada, he says, victory breeds hatred. The defeated live in pain. Happily, the peaceful live, giving up victory and defeat. So what if the enlightened move here isn't to win the argument or even to persuade? What if it's to stop playing the game altogether? Not in the sense of giving up or not caring about the truth, but the sense of refusing to let the argument become about winning, refusing to let your ego get hooked, and refusing to treat the other person as an enemy to be defeated rather than as a human being who just sees the world differently. And yes, this applies to politics too. When winning becomes everything, and when the goal is humiliation rather than persuasion, let alone truth, you get exactly what we have now. A culture where changing your mind is weakness and where compromise is betrayal. Where, let's be frank, the only move is to make the other side lose. The Buddha would recognize it immediately. He would say it's victory breeding hatred, with the defeated living in pain and everyone losing something that they can't quite name. There's still people on the other side, and our only options are to either liquidate them or to understand and meet them. And ethics aside, the former has historically never worked out. Ultimately, the Buddha's insight is the ultimate beat-them-all meta-philosophical insight, which I always love. It's that the win-lose frame itself is the poison, so get rid of it. The moment you're playing just to win, you've already lost something more important. So what do we actually do when we confront a genuine disagreement? I don't think there's a clean answer, of course, but here's where I've landed, at least for now. First, we need to know which game we're in. Is this dialectic? Are we both trying to actually find the truth? Or is it rhetoric? Am I trying to move someone towards something I believe is good? Or is this heuristic? Am I just trying to win and feel good about myself? If it's dialectic, then hell, stay. That's the rarest and most valuable kind of conversation. If it's rhetoric, be honest with yourself and about what you're doing. Persuasion isn't inherently wrong, but it's not the same as truth-seeking. So don't confuse moving someone with proving something. Here I always have to ask myself personally, what is it that I want to achieve from this? And then to find the best way to get there, stuffing my genuine desire to argue as hard as I can down, deep down, while I'm doing it. What am I trying to accomplish here is the question. And if it's heuristic, well, it's become about dominance, it's become about face, it's become about making somebody lose. Maybe the Mises move there is to stop, which isn't surrender. It's quite the opposite. We've recognized the game and we're choosing not to play. But that's it for now. So until next time, be wise and be kind and...
somebody will listen to him.